All right, good afternoon, everybody. How we doing? Good, got head shaking. Thank you for showing up at a 4 o'clock talk. Probably a little exhausted, already starting to count down the time to the cocktail hour. Appreciate you all coming here, and also appreciate everybody acknowledging that there's at least 2 buzzwords in this slide title, or this talk title. Hopefully we're still getting more comfortable with passkeys, and passkeys does not remain a buzzword, but becomes more of a day-to-day term, regular term. Preferably instead of authentication, we just talk passkeys. And yes, we have had a lot of hype around AI, but through some research and through some other things, I think it's pretty prevalent on the attacks that we're seeing, also the threats that are presented there. So how can we take our current technology stacks and actually prevent some of the things that we're seeing from an AI context? I'm pretty sure we all agree with this statement. Anybody debate against it, say that this may not be true? No? All right, I'm trying to make it a little engaging. It's 4 o'clock. Technically, I want you to carry my talk and me not have to do a lot. So how are they actually logging in versus breaking in? We can all agree phishing is number one. How many of us all read the Verizon breach reports and every other threat report that comes out every year? Yes, it's like Christmas when they come out, but it's pretty much predominant. Phishing is probably the number one, and it's going to consistently be that. If we think about some of the strength of AI and phishing, I can tell you at least one of the training techniques that we tell every user is look for grammar, look for bad English. Well, we can thank LLMs for killing that little signal for us. It's basically going to be all clean English, and actually from a couple other conversations we've had with some other countries that may have some difficult languages, they weren't previously being phished in their native language as well. They are now, because the LLMs have enabled translation pretty easily. Social engineering. It's pretty easy to do quite a few things now under the social engineering umbrella with AI. I could put together a couple AI agents and go do some OSINT. I could go and basically create a user's voice off of about a 30-second sample. I can act like anybody now for very cheap. 5 years ago it was pretty expensive. Now it's, $30 at max, and I can go ahead and become Mr. Gibson right here. Credential stuffing. Yep. Not sure if it's been validated yet. But anybody see some of the stuff on the world of X, formerly Twitter? Live Nation basically possibly had a dump of passwords. So add that to how many billions of passwords that are sitting out there right now. How fast can you parse through those? How fast can you do any kind of techniques about applying what you find out there against services that are available with passwords? Pretty much more advanced, and at the same time, it does not take a lot of talent for individuals to execute this today. There's plenty of little tools out there in which I could leverage that says, hey, take step 1, put in this information, the results of this, the LLM will now tell you, take step 2, do these things. So I no longer have to be intelligent, I no longer have to have known these things, I can actually be guided through an LLM. And then malware and keyloggers, this has gotten a little bit easier. Because now I don't even have to know how to write a keylogger. I could basically have an LLM generate a keylogger and do that. Now, there's definitely risk if you do that. Most likely, you're not going to have the skills to cover up your tracks, and so don't go out there trying to use an LLM to do this. You'll probably get in trouble, but it's a good research exercise to see it take place. So it's a very much lower cost of entry for anybody to attempt to be a nefarious or bad actor. And there is proof on these things coming out in the market. Yes, we got to do the news slides in which we're all going to confirm real quick. We've read these articles, we've read these headlines. I'm actually going to blow through these pretty quick, but they will be something I will probably draw on a little bit later. Evidence of, if you notice, these 4 all have their sections and titles, right? So from social engineering, keyloggers, phishing, they're all examples of incidents in which we can associate those 4 categories. So what we kind of advocate here at HYPR and in a lot of, hopefully in a lot of authentication arenas, is that we look at authentication in a chain link kind of fashion, right? We've all heard the terms, you're as strong as your weakest link. So when you take a second and you assess your own kind of environment, what could that weak link be? Where's the strength? I know people that have put up the strongest MFA. We're going to make this risk-based. We're going to put all these things here. But then they use knowledge-based question and answers on password resets. That's obviously probably the easiest thing to defeat. So now you've basically have that as your target that you need to protect against. So when we look at things in this analysis or in this analogy, it's okay, what's our user onboarding story? What's that look like in our program? What do we do in our user onboarding? There are plenty of customers and or people I have talked to that still ship laptops with password sticky notes in them for their employees. That's got a little bit of risk to it. What's the authentication process that they're going through? So are we using passwords? Are we using phishable methods? Password and MFA reset. This is if we have a slight maturity in our program and we've deployed MFA. Hopefully we all have MFA everywhere. That's a hope. I have had plenty of conversations where MFA isn't everywhere, so it's pretty reasonable to believe that it's not deployed everywhere and it's not standardized. And then endpoint access. Something has happened in our industry at some point in time where we kind of forgot about the endpoint. We kind of gave up on it. Part of the reasons why I'm at HYPR is because I believe in the endpoint being secured, but I'm not sure why we kind of pivoted away as an industry where we didn't want to put MFA or strong authentication on our laptops or endpoints. Salute. Bless you. When I was an employee at HP, they shipped me a laptop, and not to pick on RSA, but we had the RSA hard tokens. For anybody that's dated and aged, we know what they look like. I had a credit card version looking one that was really fancy. You could put a pass key on it or a code on it. So this is something that's been around for a really long time, but it was a terrible user experience, terrible inventory management, and when that thing went dead, I was done. The productivity was over. Right, so I see a lot of head shaking, so some other dated individuals in this room agree and have had something very similar as an experience. So what we do as businesses, they threw this part out, and like, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to put disk encryption, we're going to put these things on the endpoint, and we're going to get rid of kind of the authentication challenges on the endpoint, and we're going to leave that exposed to some degree, and then we're going to move everything to SSO. And in that, we're going to try to protect our SSO, but we're going to leave pretty much all of our interactions from that endpoint open and vulnerable. And I can understand why we made that pivot. It was terrible. Productivity loss, user experience sucks, all those things. Well, we increased quite a bit of our attack surface and our threat landscape by making that pivot. So we obviously want to look at how do we strengthen that endpoint access. So how do we make a difference with passkeys and how they start helping us out? Well, when we start looking at bringing users on board, what do we want to do? Now it's starting to show that IDV is a thing. Where maybe enterprises are willing to adopt identity verification as part of the onboarding. There's obviously some challenges that could go per country, some legal things, but we're starting to see a momentum going. So if we do have a valid physical identity that we can verify, and you can issue a passkey from there, you have some really strong connecting fibers there, which is the physical identity is now going to be something that's associated to a digital identity, and that passkey is always going to be better than a password. Bare minimum, we can hear and have opinions and thoughts about the strength of a passkey today. There's going to be evolutions to it, but you could issue an on-device passkey if you choose, which will basically put it as 2FA if you need it to be, or you can just have it as a nice, easy passkey for someone who's interviewing or onboarding in the company. You can do this during the interview process, so you only have to verify them the first time. The second interview, they use the passkey. You have confidence, you got strength. If you want to step them up from that, because maybe they're using a synced passkey, you can very much do that. Now you can use a document verification, the I-9, with our fun interviewing process, and then getting onboarded where we have to put in every one of our historical pieces of education material, I-9s, was our W-4s, and all the other documentations to support our employment. Then have it verified as a user submits it with a passkey. If we're catching on a trend every step of the way is we get a passkey and then we use it over and over and over again. And then we're going to verify a passkey and grant access as we're going to do provisioning and onboarding. So in essence, we've already kind of started looking at how we can protect at the onboarding phase versus somebody who has had a laptop shipped to them with a password on a sticky note, or we've even kind of hinted to a little bit that maybe some of the interviewing fraud, in which I have heard people talk about, in which we look at start preventing, we can actually start preventing some of that interview fraud along the way as well. So what's it look like from an authentication and a password reset or an MFA reset? Hopefully we're getting out of password resets and it's more of an MFA reset. Preferably you hang out with HYPR and it's just device. You get a new one or you get reissued one. So there's a little bit more details in these two. Bigger pictures, more colors. You don't have to take the pictures. I can hand you guys the slides if it makes it easier. When we look at how a web authentication takes place, we're predominantly still very phishable in almost all of our deployments if you just kind of assess what we're looking at in the market and what most deployments have. Passkeys are still new. They still haven't been widely adopted. They still haven't been widely accepted just yet. We're seeing momentum. We're seeing enterprises pick them up, but they haven't been completely rolled out. What does that mean? That means that you have maybe MFA in place, but it's still a phishable MFA. It could still be a push bomb. It still could be a push fatigue. It still could be somebody having to do a rotating PIN code from their soft tokens. So their primary authentication is a password plus what we'll call legacy MFA. Their fallback ends up being what? A password and an SMS OTP. So if we've been in identity long enough, we can sit here and talk about how SMS has been just the fort and terrible. The SS7 network's been compromised since 2014. In the SIM swapping, and we can come up with all those great things. But so this comes back to what's our weakest link? What do we need to protect against? And now you can see an authentication reset, which is we're calling the help desk. And how hard is it for us to fake the help desk? How hard is it to basically get them to now believe I'm Rich Gibson just by voice, just by saying, hey, I'm locked out, I need my password reset, I don't have any capabilities, I have this job title, and then the help desk is most likely going to cough up the access. So once again, what's our weakest link? We could probably put that on the help desk, but no fault to their own. We train our help desk to do a lot of things, like also be customer service oriented, right? They don't treat the customers well. What do they get? They get negative reviews. So what is their motivation? Their motivation is to give good customer service, get people productive, get them back to functional. So we're easily going to say, hey, passkeys. Passkeys can solve a lot of problems. By the time we walk out of this room, you're going to think passkeys can solve all world problems. So when we look at this flow, we can actually start looking at how we make it phishing resistant and how basically this starts knocking down some of that attack surface when you think about how clean phishing is now with an LLM, right? If you have a passkey that is phishing resistant during authentication, it doesn't technically really matter if an employee gets an email with a link on it and attempts to authenticate. That passkey is not going to grant that access, whether it's being a reverse proxy, whether it being a phishing site. That passkey is not going to authenticate a user. Plain and simple, it's dead in the water. So for me, that's a pretty strong signal right there. You could also have a fallback in combination, right? Some who will say passkeys are synced and there's not a possession definition. You could always fall back to a YubiKey. You could always fall back to possibly a badge that has a smart card or a FIDO applet on it. So now you have a second form of authentication. You have a device-bound passkey. And then what do you do for a password reset? Well, a password reset, you could use a synced passkey, but then you can fall back to the IDV method, which is now you're going to put them through a full verification process. And that verification process mixed with that passkey allows you to reset that anchored identity back into the business, right? So we're going back to what's the physical identity going to be with our digital identity. And that goes back to the very beginning. That goes to the user onboarding story, which means that we have the same implementation going back. So a user who actually has to interact with that, it wouldn't be foreign. It wouldn't be brand new. It would be part of regular user experience and onboarding. Anybody disagree with this? Think this is loony? Think this is too much passkey over and over again? Because I think it could stop a lot of AI attacks. I know it's 4 in the afternoon and you guys aren't helping me carry my conversation here. You're not letting me be lazy. All right, so next one on the list, endpoint access. We definitely need to protect the endpoints, in my opinion, and we'll continue doing that. Now I have 10 minutes on this. All right, so when we look at what we've done with our endpoints, you kind of already caught my rant a little bit about what we've done with endpoints and the fact that there isn't really much protection. And I know it's usually really hard, especially when we get into like security conversations, but how many people have an MFA authentication user experience on their endpoint in this room? I'd probably put it almost about 40%. That's a lot better than last year. So we're making progress, but that's 40%. That leaves 60% of this room pretty vulnerable on the endpoint, in my opinion. So if I'm a bad guy, if I'm going to be nefarious, that's the 40% I'm going after, right? So if we look at the primary authentication, sometimes we look at passkeys moving forward. And we're also going to kind of call out some of the fallback, because some of us use Macs, some of us use Windows. Windows Hello for Business, it is bound to the specific device. Same thing with the Touch ID on our Macs. It is bound to that device. But what do we do as a fallback? When we interact with our SSO system, when we interact with the actual operating system, I'm not here to pick on the actual endpoints themselves, but Windows Hello is basically a pin and falls back, right? So you can always get around Windows Hello's default mechanisms. You can fall back to a pin. What's a pin? It's a knowledge element, right? So there are still ways to circumvent some of these components. How we can start looking at getting around this would be that still use your primary authentication. Why? Because your users get really happy with Windows Hello because they look at their camera and they're logged in and they're done. And they're going to be really happy with that experience. I'm a Mac user. I use my Touch ID pretty often. So I just tap that nonstop. But what happens when all those things break down? What's my fallback? Right? So we're talking about what's the weakest link in the chain here during an authentication event. What's my fallback? Well, now under our vision and guys would be you'd use something like a HYPR mobile app, a YubiKey, or maybe your badge that has a PIV or FIDO on it. Right? So now the weakest link here is no longer the knowledge element. It's now no longer a shared secret. It is something that's using cryptographic-based authentication, if you think about PKI at the minimum. Anybody want to challenge or question? No?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Windows doesn't work for shared workstation.
Windows, I will agree 100%. Windows Hello does not work for shared workstation. So when you do, this is something that's pretty common in my conversations with a lot of customers. What do you do in that scenario? You're going to make your initiative Windows Hello based, but you end up having to be maybe someone who has rotating employees on the same terminal over and over again. How do you handle that? So you do need something, and this is why we recommend you would maybe go with a HYPR mobile app, or you go with a YubiKey, or you go with your badge, right? So no shared. There's still good kind of convenience factors though, because an enterprise is going to have how many users that are issued that laptop that are going to interact with it. So you have to kind of break down those use cases. The gentleman back there.
Yeah, I was going to say one scenario is corporate web users, and they can't access the endpoint for whatever reason. They're not a turn on machine or anything like that, or don't have power or network or whatever. Then you're stuck in a support gap, right? Which means how do you get an authenticator to begin to even, authenticate? And that's a support scenario that's more common.
So in some of these situations, and I think it's kind of like on the let's go with the onboarding day, right? The employees on an onboarding day, they've been issued a laptop, and let's just say they're not a tech-savvy user. There is a way during onboarding where you could leverage that passkey to actually not even have the machine delivered to them yet, but they could do an enrollment on the web that would enable them that when that machine arrived, that they just needed their mobile app, and they can actually scan a QR code and be granted access without having to be on a network. Basically lift the lid, go to work. That has been some of the solutions that we've had to work on with some of our customers, because that is a very common case. There's all sorts of streamlining of shipping of laptops now, and most people are not holding inventory on them as well. All right, so I'm going to go into my praising and preaching moment. I will still put this up as there isn't really any way to defeat our new strong chain. So we've got a passkey at user onboarding. We just increased our strength. We've got our authentication chain link. We've got password and MFA reset until everybody goes 100% passwordless under the guise of seeing the future being without shared secrets. And then we have our endpoint access having some form of passkeys and protection at that level. This is pretty high level. We can obviously pick any one of these chain links depending on your environment, depending on which you work in. And you can obviously dive a little bit deeper. We could talk about things like what your entitlements look like, what your PAM look like. Like there's obviously room for a chain link to go underneath authentication and look at what's your PAM program, right? Plenty of businesses I've interacted with that have an amazing PAM program that they've deployed, but they use simple phishable authentication to gain access to the keys of the kingdom for their whole environment. So in essence, the weakest link is the authentication to that PAM system. So on that, guys, apparently, because you guys didn't help carry me at all, that's it. We got 4 minutes early. I don't have somebody in the back waving hands and telling me to stop. But hopefully this was a little bit more insight and understanding. Look, AI is here. AI is going to move. There is a lot of hype. There is a lot of, I would say, misinformation out there that's floating around. I'm spending a little bit more time researching and kind of digging into a couple techniques. It's coming. It's being used. Look, you can even look at things like Pentest GPT is a great example of where you see evolution of what attacks start looking like and how easy it is for people to adopt it. And there's plenty of evidence and proof that the one thing that we should be scared about around the phishing side, that is 100% legit. We've been seeing evidence of that everywhere. So multi-language, great phishing emails. It's even hitting the scam market first. That was the first one to capitalize. Not necessarily just on authentication, but those who are trying to basically get gift cards and money from elders and everybody else. That is being a big catalyst. So it's coming. We just need to start thinking about ways to protect against it. I just don't think, and I'm going to give my opinion, I don't think it is where we need to spend all of our time talking about deep fake detection during a Zoom call. You can prevent it at the very beginning. You can protect it with passkeys, because if you actually have to authenticate a user into that Zoom call, they've had to go through some form of identity verification, they've had to have some phishing resistant authentication, then the guy's not going to get scammed out of 25 million, right? That was a pretty sophisticated attack. That was 3 people running deepfakes. If they had to authenticate into a Zoom with a passkey, not to say it would never happen, but that makes it a much, much more challenging attack to pull off. So with that, I only left 2 minutes behind. So I appreciate everybody for coming. Hopefully there was some value, and have a great afternoon.